Welcome, dear listeners, to Family Shadows, a place where we share the untold stories of sacrifice, heartbreak, and redemption that unfold behind closed doors. If you find meaning in these stories, if you believe family drama can teach us the deepest lessons about love and loss, I invite you to gently tap that subscribe button. It's free, but it helps this channel continue bringing you powerful stories every week. Now, let us begin today's tale. Title: They changed the locks on my house, but forgot who owned it. Henry Walker was 66 years old when he realized the silence inside his home had changed. It was not the gentle, peaceful silence that once carried Linda's laughter into the kitchen, or the kind of silence that wrapped around him after the children had gone to school. No, this was the silence of absence, of years catching up, of being left behind in a house that seemed to hold more ghosts than people. The Walker house stood on Maple Street in a quiet suburb where trees arched over the sidewalks like tired guardians. It wasn't grand or modern. The paint had dulled to a weary beige, the porch creaked with every step, and the shutters tilted as if they'd given up holding their shape. But to Henry, it was a castle, not because of how it looked, but because of how it was built. Every nail, every floorboard, every patch of brick carried his fingerprints. He had worked double shifts at the mill, saved every spare dime, and slowly bought the materials to add one more piece, one more room, one more memory. When Linda was alive, they used to sit on the back porch, coffee mugs in hand, watching the sunrise over the small patch of yard where roses bloomed stubbornly each spring. "This is our kingdom, Henry," she had whispered once, leaning into him. He never forgot that. The house wasn't just wood and plaster. It was a monument to his marriage, to the 28 years of raising children, to promises made and kept. That's why it hurt so much when the house began to feel borrowed. Most mornings, Henry woke before the sun, out of habit more than necessity. He'd spent his whole life on schedules: wake up at 5, pack lunch, fix the squeaky hinge, shovel snow, pay bills before anyone asked. Retirement should have meant freedom, but for Henry it only magnified the question he had no answer to: what now? His son David rarely called, except when money was involved. His daughter Rachel, though kinder in tone, visited only when she needed help with babysitting. That was the rhythm of things, Henry as the quiet support, never the center. He didn't resent it at first. Isn't that what fathers do? They fade into the background once their children grow. They become the emergency number, the backup plan, the steady hand that can be leaned on without thanks. But sometimes, late at night, lying in the room he once shared with Linda, he would remember her words: "Don't ever think you're not important, Henry. You are the heart of this home." And he would wonder if his children still believed that, or if they had forgotten entirely. The first sign came during a Sunday dinner. Rachel had made pasta, David brought a bottle of wine, and for a fleeting moment Henry thought perhaps they were coming back to him. But as the conversation unfolded, the truth surfaced. "Dad," David began, his voice carrying the confident weight of someone used to taking charge, "have you ever thought about moving to a smaller place? Maybe a condo, something easier to manage. This house is, well, it's too much for you." Henry put down his fork. The words didn't sting at first, they sounded like concern. But then Rachel chimed in. "David's right, Dad. You don't need all this space. It's just you now. We could help sell it and you'd have money to live more comfortably. You wouldn't have to worry about repairs anymore." It was subtle, polite. But beneath the surface, Henry heard what they weren't saying. "This house doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to our plans." He swallowed back his hurt, managed a smile, and changed the subject. But that night in the quiet of his bedroom, he sat with Linda's photograph on the nightstand and whispered, "They don't see it, do they? They don't see what this place means." For Henry, every corner of that house was a chapter. The squeak on the third stair. That was from the time David tried to sneak in past curfew and Henry caught him halfway up. The faint paint stain near the living room window. Rachel's first art project when she was 8, and Linda refused to wash it off because she said it was proof of life. How could he explain that to them? That you don't sell a memory. You don't downsize love. Henry remembered the day he and Linda signed the mortgage papers. They were young, broke, but determined. The banker had smiled at them with a mix of pity and doubt, as if to say, "You'll never make it last." But they had. Through recessions, through layoffs, through medical bills, 25 years of payments, and finally the deed had been theirs. To Henry, holding that deed had felt like winning a war, and yet here were his children treating it like a business transaction. Weeks passed after that dinner. David stopped by less. Rachel's visits became shorter. Henry tried to tell himself he was imagining things, but then came the morning that would change everything. He had gone out early for groceries, just bread, milk, and the newspaper. He liked the ritual, liked greeting the cashier who knew him by name. But when he returned to Maple Street, bags in hand, something felt off. The key wouldn't turn. He frowned, tried again. The metal scraped but refused to catch. He tried the back door, same result. That's when he noticed the shiny brass glinting in the sun, new locks, and taped to the front door, fluttering in the breeze, was a note. His hands trembled as he pulled it free. "Dad, please don't be upset. We changed the locks for your safety. You don't need to live here alone anymore. We'll take care of everything. Love, David and Rachel." Henry stood there on the porch, grocery bags slipping from his grasp, eggs cracking on the step. Neighbors peeked through curtains. A father, locked out of his own house. For the first time in years, Henry felt the weight of loneliness crush him, not because he was alone, but because his own children had decided he didn't belong in the very home he had built. That night, Henry didn't sleep. He sat in his car, parked down the street, staring at the house. His house. The lights flickered on inside, David and Rachel moving about as if they owned the place. Every fiber of him wanted to storm in, to pound on the door and demand what was his, but he didn't. He sat quietly, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white, because deep down he knew something his children had forgotten. The house still bore his name. The deed was still his, and no matter how many locks they changed, no matter how many notes they taped to the door, they had overlooked one unshakable truth. Henry Walker was still the owner of the home that held a lifetime, and he was about to remind them. The morning after Henry discovered the locks had been changed, he woke stiff from sleeping in the front seat of his old Buick. His back ached, his knees protested, but it wasn't the kind of pain that lingered in the body. It was the heaviness in the chest, the ache of betrayal that weighed most. He drove to a small diner on Main Street, the kind with vinyl booths and the smell of bacon grease soaked into every corner. He ordered black coffee, though he hardly touched it. He stared instead at the window, seeing only his children's faces as they had been years ago. Rachel, hair tied in ribbons, running barefoot through the sprinkler. David, proud in his Little League uniform, looking up at him from the pitcher's mound. He had been there for all of it. Every scraped knee, every parent-teacher meeting, every feverish night when they needed comfort. And now, they had decided he was a problem to be solved, a door to be locked. Henry had never thought of his children as cruel, misguided maybe, ambitious perhaps, but not cruel. Yet cruelty has many forms. It can be sharp and loud, or it can be disguised as care. And that note on his door, "For your safety," felt like the cruelest kind of kindness. David Walker was a man who liked numbers more than people. From the time he was a boy, he had dreamed not of building houses, but of owning them, trading them, making them multiply like coins tossed into a wishing well. He had inherited his father's stubborn jaw, but none of his father's sentimentality. To David, the house on Maple Street was wasted capital, a property too valuable to be sitting in the hands of a retired man who didn't know how to maximize it. He had run the figures on his laptop late at night. If they sold it, split the proceeds, he could finally invest in that chain of fitness centers. Rachel could pay off her debts. They would both move forward. And Dad would be fine in a smaller apartment. He didn't need the big house anymore. He'd thank them one day. At least that's what David told himself when he signed the papers for the locksmith. Rachel, on the other hand, had always been softer, more pliable. She wasn't the kind to hatch schemes, but she was the kind to be persuaded. She lived in the shadow of her brother's confidence, often mistaking it for wisdom. When David told her, "It's better for Dad. You know how he struggles with the stairs. We're doing him a favor," she wanted to believe it. She told herself she was protecting him, even as she handed over the new set of keys. But late at night, in the quiet of her kitchen, she sometimes heard her mother's voice, Linda's voice, scolding gently. "You don't protect a father by taking away his home." Still, she pushed the thought aside. She wanted to be a good sister. She wanted to be practical. And so, she joined David in locking the door against the man who had once opened every door for her. Henry stayed away for a few days. Pride held him back, and shame too. He didn't want neighbors to see him sitting in the car like a drifter, waiting for a chance to sneak into his own house. Instead, he checked into a modest motel on the edge of town, the kind where the carpet smelled faintly of mildew and the ice machine rattled all night. He tried to keep busy. He walked the streets, browsed the hardware store, lingered in the library. But everywhere he went, the thought followed him: I am a guest in the world my children now control. One afternoon he drove past the house. The curtains were different. Rachel must have bought them, bright, patterned, nothing like Linda's simple lace. Through the window he could see David pacing with his phone, Rachel's children playing in the living room. It struck him then with the force of a hammer. They weren't just planning to sell the house. They were already living in it, claiming it, erasing him. At the diner, his old friend Mark Evans slid into the booth across from him. Mark had worked as a locksmith for 30 years, his hands always smelling faintly of brass and oil. "Henry," he said, lowering his voice, "I heard what happened." Henry's eyes flickered. News traveled fast in small towns. "And what have you heard?" "That your own kids shut you out," Mark replied, shaking his head. "That's low, Henry, real low." Henry sipped his coffee, though it had gone cold. "They say it's for my safety." Mark leaned forward. "Safety, my foot. You own that house. Your name's on the deed. You've got every right to be in there." Henry looked at him for a long moment. "And what would you suggest I do?" Mark's eyes narrowed, a trace of mischief in them. "I'd suggest you let me bring my tools." That night Henry spread the deed across the motel desk. The paper was worn, edges curling, but his name was still there in bold. Henry J. Walker. He traced the letters with his finger, as if reminding himself they were real. He thought of Linda again. She would have told him not to give up. She would have told him that a house built on sacrifice could not be taken so easily. So he made a decision. Not to scream, not to beg, not to let bitterness eat him alive. He would go back. He would walk through his own front door, and he would do it with the law and the truth on his side. Mark agreed to meet him at dawn. And as Henry lay awake in the motel bed, staring at the ceiling, a strange calm washed over him. The storm was coming, but for the first time in weeks he was ready to face it. The following Sunday, David invited Henry to lunch at a trendy restaurant on the other side of town. It wasn't the kind of place Henry ever went to: sleek glass walls, waiters in pressed shirts, menu prices that made him wonder if water was free. David greeted him with a firm handshake, too formal to be father and son. Rachel was already there, shifting uneasily in her chair, her smile brittle as glass. Henry sat down, folding his napkin carefully in his lap. He had an inkling this lunch wasn't about family bonding. His children had learned long ago that he could never say no when invited face to face. David cleared his throat, launching straight in. "Dad, we've been thinking. The house is just too much for you to manage. Rachel and I want what's best for you." Henry raised his eyebrows. "What's best for me?" he repeated softly. Rachel leaned in, her voice gentler but carrying the same rehearsed certainty. "You shouldn't have to worry about maintenance, the bills, the stairs. We found a lovely senior community just 20 minutes away. Everything is taken care of. You'd have people your age around, activities, no stress." Henry looked from one face to the other. His coffee was set down by a waitress, steam rising between them, blurring their outlines like a bad memory. "And the house?" he asked. Though he already knew, David didn't flinch. "We take care of it, sell it. Use the money wisely. It's time the property worked for the family, not just sat there." The restaurant hummed with the murmur of conversations, forks clinking against plates, but at their table time slowed. Henry felt the words like knives slipped between pleasantries. "Lovely community, for your comfort. Use the money wisely." He wanted to remind them that the house had already worked for the family for decades. That every brick was a ledger of sacrifice, that without it they wouldn't be sitting here in starched clothes, eating food that cost more than he'd once made in a week. Instead, he said nothing. He cut his chicken into small pieces, chewing slowly while David droned on about financial opportunities and Rachel nodded dutifully. Inside, however, something hardened. They weren't asking, they were telling. The proposal wasn't a suggestion, it was a verdict. Henry's eyes drifted to the empty seat beside him, where Linda should have been. He could almost hear her laughter, see her hand resting on his. She would have had no patience for this charade. She would have looked her children straight in the eye and asked, "Have you forgotten who raised you? Have you forgotten the roof that sheltered you?" But Linda was gone, and Henry sat alone, watching his children rewrite his life with polite sentences. Rachel reached across the table, touching his hand. "Dad, please don't take this the wrong way. We just want you safe." Safe, the word stung. Safe from what? From living in the home he had built, from memories that now seemed to inconvenience them. Henry withdrew his hand gently. "I'll think about it," he said. David smiled, satisfied. Rachel exhaled, relieved. They thought they were winning. They didn't realize their father's silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. On the drive back to the motel, Henry passed Maple Street again. He slowed the Buick, heart thudding as he glimpsed his porch. A realtor's flyer was tucked in the mailbox. His chest tightened. They hadn't even waited. They were preparing the house for sale while inviting him to a lovely community. He pulled over 2 blocks down, shutting off the engine. For a long while he sat there, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. He wasn't just fighting for walls and windows. He was fighting for his dignity, his memory, his right to remain the author of his own story. And that fight, he knew, had only begun. That evening he spread the deed out again, smoothing its creases on the motel desk. He thought of his children's polished words, their carefully rehearsed pitch. They believed paperwork was just paper, that sentiment was weakness. But the deed was more than paper. It was the record of every overtime shift, every holiday missed, every sacrifice Linda had endured beside him. It was proof that he and Linda had won a life together. He picked up the phone, dialing Mark. "Tomorrow," Henry said quietly, "we open my door." Mark's chuckle rumbled through the line. "About time, Henry, about time." Henry hung up, a small smile forming at the corners of his mouth. His children thought they were playing chess with a man too tired to move his pieces. But they had forgotten he was the one who had built the board. And he wasn't finished yet. The morning broke gray and heavy, the kind of sky that seemed to sag under its own weight. Henry pulled into Maple Street with Mark Evans riding shotgun, a small black toolbox resting at his feet. Mark whistled low when they stopped in front of the house. "Still looks good, Henry. Solid bones, built to last, just like you." Henry didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the brass glint of the lock that didn't belong. He stepped out slowly, every creak of the porch under his boots sounding like a heartbeat. His house, his porch, his life. And yet the door in front of him had been turned into a barrier. Neighbors noticed, curtains twitched. A man walking his dog slowed down. Word had traveled, and now eyes lingered, curious to see what the old man would do. Mark crouched before the door, rolling his shoulders. "Won't take me more than a minute," he muttered. "These new locks are cheap, not worth half what your kids paid for them." Henry laid a hand on his friend's arm. Not yet, because he knew. It couldn't just be about opening the door. It had to be about being seen, about the truth unfolding where no one could deny it. A car door slammed down the street. Henry turned. David's sleek sedan pulled up, followed by Rachel's minivan. They stepped out, startled at first, then quickly hardening into defiance. "Dad," Rachel called, her voice sharp with panic. "What are you doing here?" Henry didn't move. "Standing on my porch." David strode closer, jaw tight, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We told you, Dad, it's safer for you not to stay here anymore. We've made arrangements." "You changed the locks on me," Henry said softly, almost as though to himself. David spread his arms as if reason alone would justify it. "It was for your own good. You shouldn't be alone in this place." Mark snorted from the ground. "Funny, never met a lock that screamed love before." Rachel's children peeked from the van. "Why died? watching their grandfather face their mother and uncle. A silence fell over the small crowd of neighbors gathering on the sidewalk. Henry's voice was calm, measured, but each word landed like a stone. "This is my home. I bled for it. I buried my wife's laughter in these walls, and you think a piece of brass can erase that?" "Dad, please," Rachel started, but Henry lifted a hand steady as steel. "No, today you will watch. You will watch as I open my own door." He nodded to Mark. Mark bent forward, tools clicking softly. The crowd leaned closer. David's face flushed red, his composure cracking. "You can't do this," he barked. Mark looked up, eyes gleaming. "Oh, but I can, and faster than you think." The lock clicked, a simple, sharp sound that cut through the air like a gavel. Mark turned the knob and the door swung open, the smell of Henry's home spilling out, faint wood polish, old books, and the roses Linda had once kept pressed between pages. For a moment, Henry didn't move. His chest rose and fell, his eyes wet. Then he stepped forward across the threshold into the house that was still his. The crowd erupted in murmurs. The sight of an old man reclaiming his home against his own children struck deeper than gossip. It struck like a story people would carry, whisper, pass along. Rachel covered her mouth with her hand. David lunged forward, grabbing Henry's arm. "This isn't right. You're making a fool of yourself." Henry turned, pulling free. "No, David. I'm reminding you of something you forgot. I am not a guest here. I am the owner." David, humiliated, yanked out his phone. "I'm calling the police. You've lost it, Dad." Henry didn't flinch. "Good, call them." The neighbors stirred with anticipation. Children pressed closer to parents. Even the man with the dog lingered, unwilling to miss the ending. Rachel whispered urgently, "David, don't." But it was too late. The sirens were already approaching, faint at first, then growing louder, rolling down Maple Street like the sound of judgment itself. Henry stood tall in the doorway, hands steady at his sides. His children thought the law would shield them, that paperwork and polite lies would hide the truth. But Henry knew. He had the deed. He had the right. And soon the world would know too. The sirens faded into silence as the patrol car stopped at the curb. Two officers stepped out, young men in crisp uniforms, who looked barely older than Rachel's children. Their hands rested casually near their belts, but their eyes were alert, measuring the scene before them. An elderly man at the door of a house, his grown children fuming at his sides, a small crowd of neighbors pretending not to stare too hard. Henry stood in the doorway, his back straight, the years suddenly falling from him. For the first time in weeks, he did not feel like an old man. He felt like a soldier guarding the last post he had ever sworn to protect. "Sir," one officer said, addressing David, "we got a call about a disturbance." David stepped forward quickly, his voice firm. "Yes, thank you for coming. My father's been confused lately. He doesn't realize this house isn't his anymore. He broke in with the help of a locksmith." Murmurs rose from the neighbors, confused, broken in. The words slid through the air like oil, painting Henry as the trespasser. Henry didn't move. He waited, letting David play his part, letting Rachel wring her hands and nod as though her brother's lies were concern. Then quietly, Henry reached into the inside pocket of his coat and withdrew a folded envelope. The officer turned to Henry. "Sir, do you have anything to say about this?" Henry's fingers trembled, but his voice did not. "I have lived in this house for 42 years. I paid every mortgage check. I buried my wife from this doorstep. And I raised these two standing beside me under its roof." He opened the envelope and slid out the document inside. The paper was old, creased, but the ink was clear, deed of ownership. The officer took it, eyes scanning the words, lips tightening as he read Henry's name at the top. Henry J. Walker, sole owner. He looked up at David, then at Rachel. "Is this your father's name?" Rachel's face paled. David stammered, It doesn't matter. He's too old to be here alone. He's not well." The officer's eyes hardened. "It matters." The crowd of neighbors leaned closer. Old Mrs. Green from across the street whispered loudly, "I told you he still owns that house." Another voice chimed in, "Imagine locking your father out." The shame settled like dust over David and Rachel. Henry said nothing. He didn't need to. The deed in the officer's hand spoke louder than any defense he could give. The officer handed the paper back gently. "Mr. Walker, you have every right to be here. If anyone keeps you from entering your home again, you call us. Understood?" Henry nodded once, sliding the paper back into its envelope with the care of a man returning a sacred relic. Inside the doorway, the smell of his house washed over him again. Wood polish, dust, the faint perfume of a life lived within walls. But Henry did not step farther. Not yet. He lingered there, hand against the frame, feeling the weight of years pressing through the grain. Behind him, the officers moved closer to David and Rachel. "You can't just change locks without transferring ownership. Your father is the legal resident. This could be considered unlawful eviction." David's mouth opened, then shut. Rachel lowered her gaze, tears threatening. Henry looked past them to the street. His eyes fell on the faces of neighbors who had seen him mow this lawn through summers and shovel its snow through winters. He wondered how long those faces would remember this day. An old man nearly turned out of the kingdom he had built. When the officers finally left, David rounded on Henry, his face crimson. "You embarrassed us in front of the whole neighborhood." Henry's eyes narrowed. "No, David, you embarrassed yourself. I just opened my own door." Rachel touched his arm, her voice breaking. "Dad, we thought we were helping." Henry's hand fell to his side. Helping would have meant asking me what I wanted, not locking me out. The silence between them was heavier than words. Rachel turned away, clutching her children. David stormed off, his car engine growling as he sped down the street. Henry remained on the porch, the weight of memory pressing from behind and the weight of disappointment pressing from before. He had stood his ground. He had kept his home. Yet the victory was bitter, the cracks in his family deeper than ever. That evening, Henry sat alone on the porch steps, watching the sky bruise purple and red. He remembered the countless times he and Linda had ended their days this way, her hand slipping into his, both of them at peace just to watch the world turn quiet. But now the seat beside him was empty, and the laughter that once rose from the house was replaced with echoes of shouting and silence. He rubbed the deed between his fingers like a prayer bead. He had fought for his home and won, but the battle had revealed something darker. His children no longer saw the house as a home at all. To them, it was property, an asset, a thing. And that realization cut deeper than any lock ever could. That night the house was quiet again, though not with peace. Rachel had taken her children back to her apartment. David had vanished, leaving behind only the echo of his anger. The porch light flickered against the street, illuminating Henry as he sat with the deed resting on his lap, the paper worn soft at its edges. He did not sleep. Instead, he thought. The world had a way of stripping dignity from old men. First, it was the job, someone younger, cheaper, faster taking your place. Then it was the car keys, someone insisting you shouldn't drive anymore. And finally, it was the home, someone deciding for you that you no longer needed it. Henry had accepted the first two, but the third, no, he would not yield the ground he had built with his own sweat and memory. The silence of the house pressed on him. Each creak in the floorboards, each sigh of wind through the shutters reminded him of Linda. "What would you do, my love?" he asked the darkness. And though no voice answered, he felt her presence in the steady beat of his heart. "You hold your ground, Henry, quietly, firmly. You remind them who you are." The next morning, Henry drove to the county records office. It was a squat brick building with fluorescent lights and the faint smell of dust. The clerk behind the counter raised her eyebrows when he asked for copies of every record tied to his property. "Planning to sell?" she asked lightly. Henry shook his head. "Planning to keep." He left with a folder thick with papers, the original mortgage contract, the final payment receipts, tax records, the deed. Each page was a weapon, silent but sharp. He placed them neatly in a leather binder that had once been Linda's. If David thought he could bully him with fast words and Rachel thought guilt could sway him, Henry would answer neither with shouting nor with begging. He would answer with the law, with proof, with patience. That evening Mark Evans dropped by the porch, toolbox still in his truck. He leaned against the railing, lighting a cigarette he shouldn't have lit, and squinted at Henry. "You're planning something," Mark said. Henry gave a small smile. "I'm preparing." "For what?" for the day they try again. Mark exhaled smoke into the dusk. And they will. Henry nodded. Yes, they've already shown me their cards. They don't see me as their father anymore. They see me as an obstacle. Mark's voice softened. What are you gonna do, Henry? Henry looked out at the street where the lamppost flickered to life. I'm going to do what I've always done. Work quietly. Build what needs building. And when the time comes, I'll be ready. Days turned into weeks. David stopped visiting entirely. Rumor had it he was talking to realtors, testing the waters for what the house might fetch. Rachel came once, her eyes red, her voice pleading. Dad, please, don't make this harder. We just want to help you. Henry sat at the kitchen table, binder open in front of him. He slid a document across the wood, the paper whispering like a blade. Do you see this, Rachel? This is the final check I wrote to pay off the mortgage. Do you remember where you were then? In college, worried about exams. Your mother and I ate beans for weeks so we could make this payment on time. Rachel's tears fell silently. We didn't mean to hurt you. Henry closed the binder. But you did. And what you and your brother must learn now is that hurting me won't give you this house. It won't give you the memories built here. You can't steal what was earned in love. Rachel left without another word. Henry returned to his routines. He mowed the lawn. He repaired the leaky faucet. He polished the wooden banister Linda had once adored. Each task was deliberate, a quiet act of defiance. He knew David would not give up. The ambition in that boy ran too deep, but Henry was ready now. He had his binder, his proof, his plan. And when the storm came again, as storms always do, Henry Walker would not be the man locked out on the porch. He would be the man standing firm in the house that held a lifetime. It happened on a Saturday when the sun blazed too hot for late spring and the air shimmered above the asphalt. Henry was sitting on the porch in his usual place, binder resting beside him, a glass of iced tea sweating onto the wooden step. The neighborhood was alive with children's laughter, sprinklers hissing, and the occasional lawn mower growling in the distance. That was when he saw them. David's car gliding up Maple Street, Rachel's van right behind it. The vehicle slowed, then pulled into the driveway like invaders staking their claim. Henry didn't move. He watched as his son stepped out first, wearing a collared shirt rolled to the elbows, eyes hidden behind sunglasses. Rachel followed, her face drawn tight, her children in tow. Their presence together, unannounced, set the air heavy with expectation. David climbed the porch steps with a confidence that almost passed for arrogance. Dad, he began, voice smooth but carrying a tremor of impatience, we need to talk. Henry sipped his tea and set the glass down carefully. So talk. Rachel perched nervously on the railing, clutching her hands. Dad, we're worried about you. The house is too much. The neighborhood isn't what it used to be. You deserve comfort. David's jaw tightened. We found a buyer. The words cut the air clean. Henry blinked, though inside he'd half expected them. A buyer, he repeated. Yes, David continued quickly. A developer. They are offering above market value. With that money you could live anywhere. Rachel and I could finally breathe too. It's the right move. Henry let the silence stretch. The neighbors had noticed the scene again, curtains twitching, a man pausing mid-mow to glance over, children's voices quieting as they sensed a story unfolding. He looked at his children, his voice low but firm. You already tried to take this house by force. You changed the locks. You humiliated me in front of neighbors. Now you want me to sell it so you can pocket the proceeds. Tell me, David, tell me, Rachel, where in that do you see love? Rachel's eyes filled with tears. It's not about love, Dad. It's about survival, about security. No, Henry said softly. It's about greed dressed up as concern. David removed his sunglasses, his eyes hard and cold. We're not children anymore. You can't control everything. This house is wasted space with you rattling around in it like a ghost. The words struck harder than any fist. For the first time in years, Henry felt anger flare hot and sharp. He rose to his feet, taller than either of them remembered, his shadow falling long across the porch. I am no ghost, he thundered, voice carrying across the street. I am the man who built this home. I laid its bricks. I patched its roof. I carried you both across this threshold as children when you were too tired to walk. And now you stand here and call me a relic." The neighborhood froze in the heat. People leaned from windows, held their breath as if the entire street had been summoned into witness. Rachel broke first. Tears streamed down her face and she clutched her son's hand. "Dad, I don't want to fight you. I just did what David said was right." Henry's gaze softened slightly, though his resolve did not waver. "Rachel, I raised you to think for yourself. Following your brother blindly doesn't absolve you of betrayal." She dropped her head, shame rippling through her shoulders. David, however, held his ground. His voice turned sharp like glass under pressure. "This isn't over. If you won't sell willingly, there are ways, legal ways. Don't forget, Dad, you're not the only Walker left." Henry reached for the binder at his side, opening it with steady hands. He pulled out the deed, lifting it so the sun gleamed off its worn surface. "You see this?" he asked, his voice calm again. "This says otherwise. You may have my blood, David, but you don't have my house. And if you think the law will save your schemes, remember this: the law stands with me." The binder snapped shut, the sound echoing like a hammer. David's face flushed red, fury boiling beneath the surface. But he said nothing more. He turned sharply, stalking down the steps toward his car. Rachel lingered for a moment longer, then followed, her children tugging at her sleeve. Engines roared to life and the vehicles peeled away, leaving behind a street buzzing with whispers and the old man who still stood tall on his porch. Henry sat back down, heart pounding but his expression steady. He picked up his glass of tea, now warm, and took a slow sip. "Across the street, Mrs." Green lifted a hand in quiet salute. For the first time in months, Henry felt the strange, solid comfort of something he had almost forgotten: dignity. And though the battle was not yet done, he knew the tide had turned. 3 days passed in uneasy quiet. The air inside the Walker house felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were waiting for the next intrusion. Henry lived simply. Morning coffee at the kitchen table, an afternoon stroll to the park, evenings on the porch with the binder never far from his reach. He sensed the storm hadn't passed. It was circling, biding its time. The storm arrived in the form of a certified letter slid under his door. The envelope bore the stamp of a law firm downtown, crisp, official, and cold. Henry sat at the table and slit it open with a butter knife. The words inside were sharp as any blade. Notice of intent. David and Rachel Walker, as concerned family members, had filed to petition guardianship, citing their father's diminishing capacity and inability to manage his own affairs. Guardianship. The word alone stole the breath from Henry's chest. It wasn't enough for them to change locks or plead in restaurants. They wanted to take away his very right to decide for himself. The next morning, Henry put on his best jacket, the one Linda had once called his Sunday armor, and took the bus downtown. The county courthouse loomed tall, its stone steps worn by years of footsteps. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed above lines of tired faces. He asked for directions, his voice steady though his palms damp. Finally, he found himself across the desk from a clerk who flipped through his documents. "You're Henry Walker?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "You're the sole owner of 317 Maple Street?" "Yes, ma'am." She looked him squarely in the eye. "Then you have nothing to fear. Guardianship can only be granted with proof of incapacity, and from the way you've prepared your paperwork," she tapped the binder reverently, "you're more capable than most who walk through these doors." Relief washed through him like rain on parched soil. But beneath the relief, anger simmered. Not wild, not reckless, but slow and deliberate. His children had not only tried to steal his home, they had tried to strip him of his name, his voice, his place in the world. That evening, as the sun dipped low, there was another knock on his door. 2 familiar officers stood on the porch, the same men who had come weeks before when the locks were changed. "Mr. Walker," one of them said, "we've received complaints again. Your children are saying you're not safe here alone." Henry invited them inside. He led them to the kitchen table, set down the binder, and opened it with deliberate care. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice calm but carrying steel, "I appreciate your concern, but I am not confused. I am not unsafe. I am the legal owner of this house. And unless the law of this country has changed overnight, no one, no matter how loud or how close in blood, can take that from me." The younger officer glanced at the deed, the tax records, the mortgage receipts stacked neatly in their binder sleeves. His jaw tightened with respect. "You're right, sir, they can't." The older one nodded. "We'll make a note of this. If they attempt to enter or harass you again, you have every right to call us. Do you want us to issue a formal trespass warning?" Henry paused. He could have said yes. Could have banished his children from the very porch they once played tag across, but instead he shook his head. "No, not yet. They're still my children, even if they've forgotten how to be." The officers exchanged glances, then one said quietly, "You're a better man than most, Mr. Walker." Word traveled fast. By the next day, everyone on Maple Street knew the story. At the grocery store, strangers patted Henry's shoulder. At church, whispers filled the pews. He stood up to them. He kept his home. Even children riding bikes slowed when they passed, watching him with wide eyes as if he were some kind of hero carved in flesh and bone. Henry never asked for admiration, but he understood the power of it. His children had tried to shame him quietly. Instead, the whole town had seen the truth. It was near dusk when David appeared again, his car pulling up fast, door slamming hard. He strode to the porch, anger radiating off him. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You made me look like a fool in front of everyone." Henry rose slowly, steadying himself against the railing. His voice was quiet, but it carried like thunder in the still air. "You did that yourself, son, and the law confirmed it." David's jaw clenched. For a moment, Henry saw not the grown man, but the boy who once stomped his foot when told he couldn't have more candy. The boy had grown older but not wiser. Henry stepped closer, his eyes unblinking. "You've forgotten something, David. A house can be bought and sold, but respect must be earned, and right now you have none of it." The words struck their target. David's face twisted, and for once he had nothing to say. He turned sharply, retreating to his car, tires screeching as he sped away. When the street was quiet again, Henry sank onto the porch steps. He held the binder close, not because of the papers it contained, but because of what they represented. Not just ownership, but survival. The law had spoken. His home was safe. His dignity was intact. Yet beneath the relief, sorrow lingered like a shadow. To keep his house, he had risked losing his children forever. The evening air cooled and stars began to bloom overhead. Henry lifted his eyes to them, whispering as if Linda were listening somewhere beyond. "I held the line, love, just like we always promised we would." And in that quiet, beneath the weight of loss and victory entwined, Henry felt both smaller and stronger than he had in years. The small town had a way of remembering things, of turning events into stories that clung like ivy to old fences. By the end of the week, the Walkers' quarrel was no longer just a family dispute. It had become a cautionary tale whispered in grocery aisles, murmured in church pews, and dissected in barber shops where time moved slower than the scissors. David felt it first. At the bank where he worked, colleagues exchanged glances when he walked in. He caught the faint curl of lips, the raised brows, the lowered voices. One client, a farmer Henry had once helped repair a roof after a storm, refused David's handshake outright. "You ought to be ashamed," the man muttered before walking away. The words stung because they carried the weight of truth. Rachel's humiliation came softer but no less piercing. At the school where her children studied, other mothers avoided her eyes. Some were polite enough to say hello, but their voices carried the strain of judgment. One evening when she came to pick up her daughter, she found a folded note in her child's backpack. The handwriting was shaky but clear. "Your grandfather is a good man. Be kind to him." Her daughter asked innocently, "Mom, why are people saying you don't love Grandpa?" Rachel's throat closed, her hands trembling as she pulled the child close. She had no answer that wouldn't crumble in her own mouth. For Henry, the humiliation of his children was no victory. He watched from his porch as neighbors whispered, as people looked away when David's car passed by. He knew small towns could be cruel, their memory long and sharp-edged. He thought back to when David was 12, running home after losing a baseball game, tears streaking his dusty face. Henry had knelt down, ruffling his hair, and said, "A man isn't measured by winning, son. He's measured by how he stands after losing." Now, all these years later, Henry wished his son would remember those words, but David had built his life on the illusion of never losing, and so the shame cut him deeper than pride could withstand. One evening, Rachel returned. No David this time, just her, clutching a casserole dish the way her mother used to. She stood awkwardly at the porch, children clinging to her hands. "Dad," she whispered, eyes downcast, "I'm sorry." Henry took the dish, warm against his palms, and studied her face. There it was, the girl he had raised, the girl who once cried when her puppy went missing, the girl who had begged him to braid her hair for school when Linda was too tired. "I know you are," Henry said gently. "But sorry doesn't unlock what's already been closed. You'll have to do more than apologize." Rachel nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Her children shuffled closer, and Henry bent to hug them, breathing in the innocent scent of their hair. They were too young to understand the cracks in their family, but old enough to feel them. David did not come. Not that week, not the next. Rumors spread that his business deals were failing. Investors pulled out. Partners hesitated. The story of the man who tried to lock his father out of his home had traveled farther than Maple Street, staining his reputation. Henry heard it all secondhand. He did not gloat, he did not laugh. Instead, he sat on his porch at dusk, whispering to the memory of Linda, "Our boy is drowning and he doesn't even know how to ask for help." He remembered the day David was born, the weight of him in his arms, the promise he had made silently to always protect him. That promise felt heavier now than ever. By midsummer, the Walkers' shame had become legend in town. Parents told their children, "Don't forget what David and Rachel did to their father. Don't ever forget." The story took on a life of its own, woven into the fabric of local memory. For David and Rachel, every glance, every whisper was a reminder of the line they had crossed. They had not just betrayed a man. They had betrayed an idea. The idea that family was sacred, that fathers were to be honored, not discarded. And while Henry's dignity had been restored, their reputations bore scars that no apology could erase. Henry felt the weight of it. He did not rejoice in their downfall. He carried it as a burden because he knew that while justice had been served, love had not been restored. He sat on the porch each night, watching the sun sink into the horizon, wondering if his children would ever find their way back, not to his house, but to his heart. And though the town might never forgive them, Henry held onto the quiet hope that he could. Because forgiveness, he knew, was the only thing that could heal what shame had broken. Autumn came quietly to Maple Street. Leaves rustled down in copper and gold, gathering in piles along the sidewalk. The Walker house stood steady beneath its canopy of branches, windows glowing soft at dusk, a quiet testament to endurance. Henry sat in his favorite chair by the window, a book open on his lap, though his eyes lingered more on the world outside than on the words. He thought often of Linda in these moments, her laughter in the kitchen, her gentle scolding when he tracked mud into the hall, her steady hand when life had been too heavy to carry alone. The house still breathed her presence, and that, more than anything, gave him strength. His children came less often now. Rachel, sometimes, bringing her little ones who ran through the halls with innocent delight. David, rarely, his pride still too wounded, his shame too raw. But even in their absence, Henry felt something had shifted. They had been forced to face themselves in the eyes of the community, forced to reckon with the weight of their choices. Perhaps in time, that reckoning would lead them back not just to the house, but to the love that built it. Henry knew this. Locks could keep a man out of his home, but they could never keep out the truth. Paperwork could be twisted, but it could also defend. And while betrayal could wound dignity, when held quietly, firmly, had the power to heal. He ran his hand along the binder that still sat on the shelf, the deed tucked safely within. It wasn't just property. It was proof that love and labor mattered, that a lifetime of sacrifice could not be erased with a key. One evening, as neighbors strolled past, a boy on a bicycle stopped and called out, "Mr. Walker, are you really the man who got his house back?" Henry chuckled softly, his voice warm as he replied, "Son, I never lost it. I only reminded a few people of the truth." The boy grinned, pedaled away, and Henry leaned back, the sunset painting his walls in gold. His heart, though scarred, felt lighter. The locks had been changed, yes, but so too had he. He had rediscovered his strength, his dignity, and the quiet power of standing firm. And that was the lesson he hoped his children, and anyone who had watched, would never forget. Dear friends, thank you for walking through this story with us today. Stories like Henry's remind us that family, though complicated and sometimes painful, is where our deepest lessons are born. I hope, wherever you are, you hold close the people who have sacrificed for you. I hope you treasure the roofs built with love, not just with money. And above all, I hope you remember that dignity and justice are worth defending, quietly, firmly, and with heart. From all of us here at Family Shadows, thank you for listening. May you and your loved ones be blessed with good health, warm homes, and families that bring you more joy than sorrow. Take care of yourselves, and until next time, stay safe, stay strong, and hold on to love.